Behind every fighter's rise to fame is a battle the public rarely sees. In the UFC, glory in the octagon doesn't guarantee peace outside of it. For some of the sport's most promising stars, the real knockout came not from a punch, but from heartbreak, betrayal, and scandal. These are stories of top UFC fighters whose careers and fortunes were wrecked, not by rivals, but by relationships. From messy divorces and violent breakups to lawsuits and financial ruin, these fighters had everything and lost it all. Sometimes it wasn't their opponent that destroyed them, it was the people they loved. Jonathan Koppenhaver, better known as War Machine, was once considered a dangerous prospect in the MMA world. His fighting style was aggressive, raw, and unpredictable, traits that made him a fan favorite and a legitimate threat inside the cage. But that same volatility would later become his downfall. After short stints in the UFC and Bellator, War Machine seemed destined to flame out, but it was his relationship with adult film star Grispi that would trigger one of MMA's darkest scandals. Their relationship began in 2013 and was immediately the subject of media attention. On the surface, it looked like a fantasy pairing, a bad boy fighter and a glamorous adult actress. But behind closed doors, War Machine was spiraling. Reports began surfacing that he was jealous, violent, and controlling. Friends of Mac would later testify that he had isolated her from social circles, accused her of infidelity, and allegedly monitored her every move. Then came the night that ended everything. In August 2014, War Machine broke into Grispi Mac's home in Las Vegas and found her with another man. What followed was a brutal and nearly fatal attack. Mac was beaten so badly that she suffered 18 broken bones, a fractured rib, a ruptured liver, and had several of her teeth knocked out. She later testified that War Machine had attempted to kill her. He fled the scene but was captured after a week-long manhunt. The legal fallout was swift. War Machine was convicted on 29 felony counts, including kidnapping and sexual assault. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 36 years. Whatever fortune he had built from fighting and sponsorships was gone. Legal fees drained any remaining assets, and his public image was annihilated overnight. What makes this story especially tragic isn't just the violence, it's how preventable it all was. Signs of War Machine's instability were visible long before the assault. He had prior arrests, volatile behavior, and even changed his legal name to War Machine. The UFC and the MMA world at large distanced themselves after the incident, and today his legacy is synonymous not with fighting, but with horror. His downfall wasn't due to a losing streak or financial mismanagement. It was the consequence of obsession, unchecked rage, and a relationship that turned into a nightmare. War Machine wasn't just defeated, he was erased. Mike Perry was always known for his wild energy, a brawler who talked with his fists and seemed born for highlight reels. Early in his UFC career, fans were drawn to his unapologetic style. But for every brutal knockout Perry delivered, there was an equally brutal headline outside the cage. And at the center of many of those headlines, a deeply toxic and violent romantic relationship. In 2020, Perry's ex-wife, Danielle Nickerson, filed a restraining order and went public with disturbing claims of domestic abuse. According to Nickerson, Perry would physically assault her during arguments, choke her, and even throw things in her direction. Court documents detailed a relationship fueled by violence, paranoia, and emotional manipulation. Perry denied the claims, but his behavior in public didn't help his case. That same year, he was caught on video punching an older man during a bar altercation in Texas, while Danielle stood nearby, trying to calm him down. UFC fans began to question whether they were watching a fighter slowly unravel in front of their eyes. The controversies began costing him opportunities. He lost sponsorships, and companies were hesitant to work with someone so unpredictable. Even within the UFC, Perry became more of a spectacle than a serious contender. He infamously fired his coaches and had his new girlfriend, who had no MMA experience, corner him during a live fight. That moment, intended to be rebellious and unique, became symbolic of a man losing control of his career. As Perry's personal life spiraled, so did his performance. He lost 5 of his last 7 UFC fights, many of them in punishing fashion. His earnings dwindled and legal fees mounted. His once promising trajectory had been shattered, replaced by meme clips and Twitter flame wars. He eventually left the UFC and joined bare-knuckle boxing, a move seen by many as a financial necessity rather than a career strategy. The tragedy of Mike Perry isn't just his fall, it's how preventable it was. Had he sought proper guidance, counseling, and structure, he could have carved out a decade-long run. Instead, his name is now associated with chaos, domestic drama, and squandered potential. For Perry, the fight was never just in the cage, it was in the mirror, and so far, he's been losing. There was a time when Josh Grispi was being groomed for stardom. Bursting onto the WEC scene as a featherweight phenom, Grispi quickly earned the nickname The Fluke for his uncanny ability to finish top opponents in under 2 minutes. By age 21, he had compiled a 14-1 record and was next in line for a UFC title shot against Jose Aldo. Then, everything collapsed. Injuries sidelined Grispi just as the UFC absorbed the WEC roster. While other fighters gained momentum in the spotlight, Grispi struggled to recover both physically and mentally. He lost 4 consecutive fights, and his once glowing future dimmed rapidly. But it wasn't just the losses that destroyed his reputation. It was what happened outside the cage. In 2014, Grispi was arrested in Massachusetts for an appalling string of domestic violence charges against his wife, Caitlin. According to police reports, Grispi had turned their home into a place of terror. He punched her, beat her with a wooden dowel, and even sicked his trained pit bull on her multiple times. Investigators said the abuse was the worst case of domestic violence we've ever seen. Public outcry was immediate. The UFC issued no comment, and Grispi's name vanished from any promotional material. Sponsors disappeared overnight. Friends and training partners cut ties. He had become untouchable, not because of his record, but because of his character. Grispi was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison. By the time he got out, MMA had moved on. His attempts to return to fighting were unsuccessful, and the damage to his reputation was irreversible. Financially, he was ruined. Legal bills drained his accounts, and no gym or promotion would touch him. Once seen as a future champion, Grispi is now remembered as a cautionary tale, someone who let rage and control ruin not only his career, but another person's life. In the cage, Grispi showed promise. Outside of it, he showed violence, cowardice, and cruelty. And unlike a title shot, redemption isn't something you can just earn back with another win. Melvin Guillard had the speed, the power, and the charisma to be a megastar. With highlight reel knockouts and a fighting style built for excitement, he was one of the UFC's most promising lightweights in the mid-2000s. But behind the scenes, Guillard was living fast and burning through everything he earned just as quickly. And when personal relationships turned toxic, everything started to spiral. Guillard's fall wasn't immediate. In the UFC, he put together a respectable record and fought top names like Nate Diaz, Joe Lawson, and Donald Cerrone. He was flashy in both his performances and lifestyle. Designer clothes, luxury cars, and nights out that became infamous in fight circles. But it wasn't sustainable. His spending was reckless, his ego unchecked, and his personal life messy. Then came the domestic violence allegations. In 2018, Guillard was arrested in Colorado after allegedly assaulting his girlfriend during a heated altercation. The police report was brutal, detailing how he slammed her head into a wall and left her bloodied. This wasn't his first legal issue. He'd already racked up multiple arrests for bar fights, substance possession, and public disturbances. But the domestic abuse charge forced the remaining doors in MMA to close for good. By this point, Guillard's UFC career was long over. He'd bounced bounced from promotion to promotion, World Series of Fighting, Bellator, Bare Knuckle FC, and lost more fights than he won. His once lethal explosiveness was gone, replaced by a battered record and a body showing the wear of too many wars. With his name tarnished and sponsors unwilling to touch him, Guillard's financial collapse became inevitable. He admitted in interviews that he was broke, living paycheck to paycheck, and barely scraping by. At one point, he confessed to taking fights on short notice just to pay rent. The man who once electrified arenas was now a cautionary tale, a fighter who let his vices, including violent relationships, override discipline and focus. Guillard's downfall wasn't just about the punches he took, it was about the self-inflicted ones. A promising career was lost not due to a lack of talent, but because of the chaos he let control his life. Today, few in the sport even mention his name. Leben was one of the UFC's original wild men, a brawler with red-dyed hair, a granite chin, and an underdog energy that fans couldn't help but love. But behind the scenes, Leben's life was a storm of addiction, heartbreak, and destructive relationships. And while his in-cage wars were legendary, it was his battles at home that truly broke him. Early in his career, Leben was already showing signs of instability. A product of a troubled childhood and broken home, he carried trauma into every part of his adult life. He drank heavily, abused prescription drugs, and was constantly getting into trouble with coaches, opponents, and authority figures. But it was his relationship with his ex-wife, Kalina, that pushed him to the edge. In 2015, Leben was arrested after an incident where he reportedly broke into Kalina's apartment, pointed a loaded assault rifle at her, and threatened her. The details were chilling. Kalina claimed that Leben had become increasingly paranoid, aggressive, and erratic. He was charged with multiple felonies, including unlawful possession of a firearm and making terrorist threats. His bail was set at $500,000. At the time of his arrest, Leben was already deep in financial trouble. His UFC paychecks had long dried up, and his attempts to bounce back in smaller promotions were hampered by injuries and lack of discipline. He was broke, jobless, and legally barred from fighting. In court, he pled not guilty, but the damage to his reputation was irreversible. In his autobiography, The Crippler, Cage Fighting, and My Life on the Edge, Leben detailed how his personal relationships, especially the toxic and abusive ones, fueled his decline. He described Kalina as someone he loved deeply, but admitted that their relationship became a cocktail of jealousy, fear, and violence. After his arrest, he entered rehab, citing the breakdown of his marriage as a wake-up call. But financially, the hole was too deep. Lawsuits, child support, and legal fees bled him dry. He resorted to working as a gym coach, taking odd jobs, and doing what he could to stay afloat. Though he's made attempts to clean up and give back to the sport, the scars remain, both on his body and in his wallet. Leben's story is one of extremes: extreme violence, extreme love, and extreme self-destruction. And in the end, it was the chaos at home, not the cage, that truly defeated him. If any fighter defines the line between greatness and ruin, it's Jon "Bones" Jones. Once heralded as the youngest champion in UFC history and considered by many as the greatest mixed martial artist of all time, Jones was supposed to be untouchable. But with every title defense came another controversy. And when it came to relationships, both romantic and professional, Jones created more enemies than allies. The most public incident came in 2015 when Jones was involved in a hit-and-run accident involving a pregnant woman. He fled the scene on foot, only to return to grab a wad of cash from his car. Police later found marijuana and a pipe in the vehicle. He was stripped of his title, suspended, and faced mounting legal pressure. What fans didn't know at the time was that behind the scenes, Jones was already dealing with serious personal demons, including allegations of abuse from a longtime partner. In 2021, during UFC Fight Week, when Jones was being honored for his induction into the Hall of Fame, he was arrested again in Las Vegas for domestic violence. According to the police report, his fiancée had blood on her lip and claimed he pulled her hair in front of their children. Jones denied the allegations, but the damage to his image and sponsorships was immediate. Reebok dropped him. His relationship with Jackson Wink MMA, the gym that built him, soured. UFC President Dana White even publicly said he was used to it when referring to Jones's arrests. a shocking statement about someone once positioned as the face of the sport. Jones's financial troubles started to mount. Lavish spending, court fees, fines, and broken deals left him vulnerable. Despite massive UFC paydays, he admitted in 2022 that he felt underpaid and unappreciated, pushing for a heavyweight debut that never seemed to come. Some insiders whispered that his demands were rooted not in confidence, but in financial necessity. At the heart of it all were relationships gone wrong, romantic partners who suffered in silence, teammates who walked away, and a sport that began to turn its back. The greatest fighter of his era became its biggest cautionary tale. Not because he lost, but because he never learned how to win outside the cage. Jason "Mayhem" Miller was built for the spotlight. With bleach blonde hair, wild entrances, and a mouth that never stopped, he was more than just a fighter. He was entertainment. He hosted MTV's Bully Beatdown, clowned around with the Diaz brothers, and brought unhinged energy to every UFC appearance. But behind that mask of laughter and chaos was a man rapidly losing control. And at the center of much of that unraveling were turbulent romantic relationships and disturbing domestic violence charges. Miller's decline began after his UFC return in 2011. He lost back-to-back fights and was cut from the organization. But the bigger headlines came outside the cage. Between 2013 and 2021, Miller was arrested over a dozen times, many of them involving women. In 2013, he was arrested for domestic violence after allegedly assaulting his girlfriend. He was accused again in 2015 and again in 2017. Each time, Miller's behavior became more erratic. He once live-streamed a standoff with police from inside his home. Another time, he was arrested naked in a church. The same man who made audiences laugh on MTV was now the subject of mugshots and court reports. Legal troubles drained what little money Miller had left. Court-ordered rehab, fines, and jail time left him bankrupt. By 2021, he was facing felony charges for causing bodily harm to a romantic partner and resisting arrest. The image of Mayhem had changed forever, from a lovable madman to a dangerous, unstable figure. His career never recovered. His last few fights were either canceled or brutal defeats. Even small regional promotions wouldn't book him. His relationships, especially with women, had become his Achilles heel, not because they distracted him, but because of the abuse and chaos he brought into them. Jason Miller's story isn't just tragic, it's disturbing. It's a portrait of a man who let the character of Mayhem consume the real person. And in the end, he didn't just lose money or fame, he lost himself. Travis Browne was once one of the UFC's top heavyweights. With a towering frame, brutal knockout power, and wins over Alistair Overeem and Josh Barnett, Browne looked like a future title contender. But then, as quickly as he rose, he vanished. And many point to a single turning point: his relationship with Ronda Rousey. In 2015, Browne was temporarily suspended by the UFC after his then-wife, fitness model Jenna Renee Webb, accused him of domestic violence. She posted pictures on Instagram showing bruises and alleged that Browne had physically abused her. Though an internal UFC investigation found inconclusive evidence, Browne was sidelined, and Webb divorced him shortly after. Just months later, Browne began dating Ronda Rousey, the face of women's MMA and one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. Many fans saw this as controversial. The relationship moved fast. They became public, then engaged, and eventually married in 2017. But as Rousey's stardom skyrocketed and then plummeted, so did Browne's career. He lost 4 straight UFC fights. His performances were lackluster, and fans began to speculate. Was he more focused on Rousey's Hollywood ambitions than his own training? He moved camps frequently, lost momentum, and seemed disconnected inside the octagon. Financially, Browne's decline was steep. His biggest UFC paydays were behind him. He didn't land the big sponsorships or film deals deals like Rousey did, and after quietly retiring, he faded into the background, often appearing in the shadow of his wife's ventures. Whether it was WWE or Netflix shows, Browne now lives a quiet life on a farm with Rousey. While that might sound peaceful, the reality is more complex. He's been accused of riding the coattails of a woman more famous than himself, and his legacy in MMA has been overshadowed by controversy, losses, and speculation about his personal life. He was once a feared contender. Now, he's barely remembered, except as Rousey's husband. There's a haunting pattern to these stories. Almost every fighter in this video began with promise. They had skill, charisma, the UFC spotlight, and in some cases, were destined for greatness. But then, a toxic relationship or a violent scandal involving a partner sent everything into chaos. Some lost it all through abuse and assault, like War Machine or Josh Grispi. Others collapsed under the weight of legal fees, public scrutiny, or personal dysfunction, like Jason Miller or Chris Leben. And then there were those like Travis Browne or Mike Perry, whose relationships became so entangled with their careers that the fallout was inevitable. It's not just about women ruining fighters. That would be a gross oversimplification. The truth is, these men ruined themselves through violence, ego, addiction, or emotional immaturity. The women in these stories were often victims, trapped in a world where fame and power offered no protection from harm. Fighting is a brutal sport, but for these men, the fight outside the cage, the one with their demons, their partners, and their own self-destructive tendencies, proved deadlier. Money came and went. Fame faded fast. And in the end, they were left with broken legacies and empty bank accounts. Today, most of them are ghosts in the MMA world. They pop up in headlines when arrested, or surface briefly in a podcast interview before disappearing again. No Hall of Fame, no glory, no redemption. Just cautionary tales told in hushed tones. The UFC may build warriors, but life outside the cage? That's a whole different arena.